Welcome to the channel. Today's story is full of surprises and real drama. Subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's dive in. 2 weeks ago, I discovered that my wife of 7 years, Sophia, had been filmed at a bachelorette party with 2 male dancers. One of the women there secretly recorded it on her phone and later shared it with her boyfriend, Derek, who happened to know me through mutual acquaintances from high school. Although Derek and I weren't close, we had some shared connections. His girlfriend told him to keep the video private, and it stayed hidden for years. Derek and I have never been on good terms, we only crossed paths due to mutual connections. However, Derek and his girlfriend broke up some time ago, and since then, he's been casually showing the video to his friends for entertainment. It became a recurring topic at gatherings and guys' nights out. Most of the women seen in the video were in relationships at the time. I can't help but suspect they might have been mocking me, though that might just be my insecurity talking since the story never reached me or any of my close friends. This changed about 5 weeks ago when one of our mutual friends, Ethan, had a drink with Derek. The conversation somehow steered toward the story, and Derek began joking about how his ex-girlfriend recorded a group of girls going wild at a bachelorette party, including 2 dancers getting involved with one of the women, who happened to be my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. Apparently, Derek had trust issues with his girlfriend back then and kept a close watch on her activities, leading her to record everything as proof of her innocence in case he suspected her of cheating. This led to her involving her friends to show her then boyfriend that she was the innocent and virtuous one. According to Ethan, all the women, including the one with the camera, went backstage into the dancers' dressing room. My girlfriend was the only one who went all in, not just BJ and flashing. She took on both dancers simultaneously in their dressing room while her other friends gave BJ and flashed. She was being plowed by both dancers while the other woman secretly recorded. A month ago, Ethan became aware of this situation and felt the urge to confide in me. However, he grappled with this decision because he knew about my happy marriage and shared a close bond with both of us. He understood the depth of our love, especially since we have 2 young daughters together, aged 4 and 6. 14 days ago, on a Thursday, Ethan reached out to me and expressed a desire to discuss something crucial. His tone indicated the significance of the matter. I believed it was a substantial issue possibly related to some challenges he was facing and needed someone to talk to. Over the years, our friendship, which began in high school, had been characterized by mutual support. The next day, we arranged to meet at a bar, and I noticed he was already there when I arrived. His anxious demeanor made it apparent he was preoccupied with something, and I suspected it had to do with me rather than himself. I grew up in a tough neighborhood. I'm a big guy standing at 73, and I've had a few run-ins with the law in the past, mostly related to my crew activities, which gave me a certain reputation. However, all of that is behind me now. Among my peers, I've always been seen as a natural leader, with many guys looking up to me. During my teenage years, I used to be quite aggressive and got into numerous fistfights, but going to prison a couple of times, getting married, and having kids have transformed me. It's been over 8 years since I last got into any trouble. I'm less aggressive now, more composed and mature, especially since I have 2 kids and a stable job as a union electrician. I have a long history with Ethan. We go way back to high school. I used to protect him from bullies since he's a year younger than me, now at 29 years old and working a decent corporate job. Our social circles didn't overlap much. Anyway, when I took a seat at the bar, I could sense that whatever he had to say was about me, judging from his body language. It made me quite anxious. So I turned to him, asked how he was doing, and inquired about what was bothering him. He replied that what he was about to tell me might seriously affect my relationship with my wife, but he felt I needed to know. He didn't want me to find out years down the line that he knew something but didn't tell me. He felt it would be dishonest to keep this from me. At this point, I thought he should just go ahead and spill the beans. Then he dropped the bombshell. A few weeks ago, while hanging out with some friends, one of them showed him a video from about 8 years ago. The video depicted my wife involved with 2 dancers in a dressing room. When I heard this, I couldn't believe it. I was flooded with emotions like anger, confusion, and shame all at once. I had the urge to confront him, thinking it might be some kind of prank, but deep down, I knew it was true. I distinctly remembered the day my wife mentioned attending a bachelorette party for one of her friends 8 years ago. Back then, we had been exclusively dating for about 8 months but hadn't moved in together yet. My girlfriend came from a traditional Irish Catholic family, and she was exceptionally beautiful. I truly love my wife, so my initial reaction was to protect her honor and reputation. In the past, the old me might have even confronted Ethan aggressively for bringing this up. Maybe that's why Derek didn't inform me earlier, knowing I had a history of rage. I inquired if Ethan had the video, and he claimed it was on Derek's phone. He said he only saw part of it, but I suspected he was lying because usually, people don't watch just part of something like that. However, that detail doesn't matter at this point. I realized Ethan wouldn't bring me here just to play a cruel joke about my wife's affair that would be extremely risky with someone like me. So, I asked him how I could contact Derek, and Ethan said he could arrange something. I inquired if I could have Derek's phone number, and Ethan stepped outside to make a call. We went outside together, and upon returning, he told me Derek wasn't answering but had sent a text. Ethan assured me he'd keep me updated once he heard back. I initially wanted to leave the bar and immediately call my wife, but Ethan advised me to take some time to think things through before doing anything rash. So, I decided to stay at the bar and talk to Ethan about my relationship with my wife, which had been great up to that point. I never expected her to be involved in something like this. During the first year of our dating, she did show a bit of a wild streak, but I didn't realize how wild it was until now. After that first year, it seemed like she had turned her life around, leaving that party phase behind. However, she does change when she drinks. When we started dating, she was still in that party phase, but that's no excuse because we were in a committed relationship when she attended that bachelorette party. Our relationship, like any other, has had its ups and downs. Her issues with alcohol were a problem at one point, but she got it under control, mainly because of our first daughter. While I was talking to Ethan, he received a text from Derek and said he could share his number with me. I immediately called Derek and asked if we could meet so he could give me the video on a flash drive. He told me he was out of town and would return next week. I expressed my interest in obtaining a copy of the video and inquired about how much he wanted in exchange for deleting it from his phone or any other storage. I hoped he'd agreed to delete it willingly, but he asked for $12,000. This was one of the reasons I never liked Derek. I managed to negotiate it down to $11,500. There seemed to be no reason for him to hold on to this video. My wife and his ex-girlfriend were no longer friends, and his ex-girlfriend likely wouldn't hold it against him. I think he was just being a jerk. However, I was glad he asked for money because it allowed us to create a legal agreement preventing him from releasing the video to the public, leaving me as the sole owner of the only copy. My aim was not only to protect my wife but also my daughters and myself from further embarrassment. The thought of a tape of my wife circulating on the internet would be a significant embarrassment for my family. I wanted to control the situation as much as possible before dealing with my wife later. From what I've heard, the video is too explicit to even contemplate. That night, I was too intoxicated to drive, so I had to take a cab home and leave my car in the bar's parking lot. When I got home, I could barely walk through the door. All I remember is calling my wife a cheater and passing out. I wanted to confront her that night, but I was too intoxicated to handle it. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover on my couch, wrapped in a blanket. My wife was supposed to go to work that day, but she called in because she was concerned about my unusual behavior and wanted to figure out what was going on. She handed me a glass of water as I sat there, and after taking a sip, she asked me what was bothering me. I glanced at her, and all the memories from the previous night came rushing back. I hadn't been this angry with my wife in a long time, and I needed answers. The images of her with those two dancers were all I could think about when I looked at her. I couldn't even find words to speak. I just started sobbing like a baby. I couldn't remember the last time I cried, and that was one of the lowest moments in my life. My wife seemed bewildered, and she started crying too. She wanted to comfort me with a hug, but I pushed her away. At this point, she was getting frustrated and kept asking me what was happening. I finally told her that there was a video out there showing her involved with two dancers at a bachelorette party 8 years ago. The look on her face was one of confusion, and then she began denying it, claiming it was fake. She insisted that it couldn't be true, but I reminded her of which bachelorette party it was and asked if she was there. She admitted being there but vehemently denied cheating on me. She said it was all lies, but I suggested that perhaps she was intoxicated and couldn't recall what happened. She fired back that she would remember if she had been with two guys. She asked me to show her the video, and I replied that the guy with the video was out of town. At this point, I really wanted to believe her. She seemed genuinely convinced that it wasn't her. I thought maybe it was a scam to extort $11,500 from me, but that amount didn't seem worth a stunt like this. I really wanted to see the video to make sure my wife was telling the truth. The guy messaged me that he'd be back in town on Tuesday, and today was Sunday, so I've been quite anxious. I can't stop thinking about that video. My wife has been acting strangely around the house, doing extra things as if she feels guilty. She keeps asking if I'm okay all the time, making it seem like I'm the crazy one or that I just made up this whole story. Who would invent something like this? By Monday, I couldn't wait any longer. I told the guy that we didn't need to meet right away. I could send him the $11,500 through Cash App, and he could download the video using Dropbox. He told me he didn't have enough space on his Dropbox and couldn't delete anything to free up room for the video, so I suggested he create another Dropbox account, which he did. By Monday evening, I had sent him $11,500 on Cash App, and he sent me a link to the video. I opened the video and saw a group of women, including my wife's friends from back then, cheering with excitement as the dancers performed. Then I witnessed my wife touching the dancers in their private areas through their clothes. The footage switched to the dressing room, where my wife and two other women were on their knees preparing the dancers. I counted about 5 guys, if you catch my drift. Then there's another part of the video where my wife was engaging in acts while still clothed. 2 dancers were taking turns. The video was just as explicit as I had feared. It looked homemade and poorly done, but it was undoubtedly her. There was no mistaking it. Her voice was unmistakable. This private moment that I thought was just between us was actually shared with total strangers. It seems like the dancers knew they were being recorded but didn't care. I'm not sure if my girlfriend and her friends were aware because they never acknowledged it. She wasn't forced into anything in some cases, she was actively seeking attention and even taking the initiative. She gave it up to a bunch of guys she met that night, but the very first time I met her, she acted like she wasn't so easy. While I didn't get the sense that she was some sort of pure Mary when we started dating, she didn't pretend to be that way because she was a party girl at the time. She made me wait for about 2 months before our first intimate encounter. Now everything I thought I knew about my wife is being called into question. In our current relationship, her being close with me is a big deal, especially after our second daughter was born. And here she was, enthusiastically engaging in acts with complete strangers without holding anything back. I just need to vent because I always believe there were special moments you share with someone you love, and it feels like that belief has burst like a bubble in my face. This is seriously affecting my self-esteem, and the worst part is that I can't help thinking that I wasn't enough for her back then and am not enough for her now. Nowadays, I have a few extra pounds on me, but back then, I was in good shape. I'd like to think I'm a good-looking guy, but despite that, she did this willingly with those guys. I'm curious if any of you guys in relationships have experienced something like this because it can't have been just me. My wife, up until I saw this video, was almost perfect, a great mother to my 2 girls, takes care of me, and she's not lazy like most unfaithful wives I've read about on this site. She's completely traditional now, although I might not have said that when we first started dating, but she's grown into it over time. That's what makes it so hard to just walk away from all of this. Regarding your question about protection, they did use it. Not that it really matters, but they were using protection, and she was so into it that she probably wouldn't have noticed if they didn't. I remember how adamant she was about using protection the first time we were close, and it actually scored her some points in my book back then. This whole situation makes me wonder if our relationship all this time has just been a big lie. Maybe I don't really know who she is. Perhaps she had other partners I didn't even know about because she could have sworn on her life that the person in the video wasn't her before I saw it. If I had just heard about the video and hadn't seen it, I might have believed her. She was that convincing. So now I'm wondering what else I'm believing that isn't true. When she came back home that evening, I connected the video to my TV so she could clearly see it was her. I admit I went overboard because I was furious with her. I thought she'd show some remorse or beg for forgiveness. But no, it was like she had prepared excuses in advance. She even claimed that we weren't in an exclusive relationship at the time, and went as far as saying we weren't even in a relationship. I fired back, even if you were right about us not being exclusive at the time, though we both know you're lying, how is it normal to have closeness with two men like that? The person she portrayed to me and has been acting as ever since we met is not the same as the one I see in the video. Then she changes her story again, claiming that she was drunk and that alcohol caused them to take advantage of her. I pointed out that she was clearly a willing participant, and there was no point in the video where she resisted. She countered by saying the video was doctored and didn't show the whole picture. She also blamed alcohol, but she might have been a bit tipsy, yet she was fully aware. Her motor skills were normal, and she wasn't slurring her words. She kept lying and making excuses. I didn't want to argue with her, but it felt like she was avoiding full responsibility. She was upset with me for bringing this up, stating that it shouldn't matter because we were just friends with benefits back then, not in a committed relationship. She argued that it's in her past and asked how I'd feel if she held my past against me, claiming she accepted me for who I was. She questioned why I couldn't do the same for her. We've never had a violent relationship, and I had never considered it, but the way she was dodging responsibility made me come close. I didn't want to wake up my kids, and I couldn't stand being around her that night, so I decided to leave the house with a few clothes and went to my coworker's house to cool off because I didn't want to do something I'd regret, especially since I was already on probation. Update: I packed some of my regular and work clothes and went to stay with a single friend who's also a coworker. My wife kept calling me to come back home, but I ignored her calls. I knew I'd have to face the situation eventually, but I was too angry to be around her. She sent me texts about how I wasn't willing to forgive her for her past, comparing it to how she had forgiven me for spending almost a year in prison for aggravated assault and being on probation for 10 years, which has held me back in life. I didn't go to college, but my wife did, and she works as a physical therapist. Still, I earn more because I'm a union electrician during the day and take on additional projects, usually in the evenings and after work, which are quite profitable. I felt like our marriage had become a joke, and I wasn't sure who she truly was. I'm not saying I thought I was marrying a perfect angel when I proposed to her. I knew almost everyone has some secrets, but this one felt like too much. I was aware she had a history when we got together, but I thought she was just like any other regular party girl. I remembered asking her how many guys she had been with, and she said 5, which was obviously a lie because that was after the bachelorette party. I knew about 3 of her previous boyfriends and 2 short flings she had, so who knows how many more I wasn't aware of. Still, a part of me believed that despite all this, we still had a great relationship, but another part of me wondered what other lies she had told me. At this point, I was deeply confused, and my life felt like it was falling apart. I couldn't stay with my friend for too long because I had electrical projects to work on and deadlines to meet. My house also served as storage and an office for all my equipment, so I couldn't hide out at my friend's place indefinitely. 2 days later, I had to return home because I still had shared responsibilities as a dad and a contract deadline to meet. The thought of divorce or legal separation hadn't even crossed my mind yet. I was still trying to process all the information. I felt deeply depressed, lost my appetite, and had a strong need to talk to someone. My dad has always been there for me in times of trouble, although when I was younger, I didn't often heed his advice, which got me into a lot of trouble. But as I've gotten older, I've learned to listen to him more. I decided to call my dad and share my situation with him. He was surprised because he too didn't expect my wife to be that kind of woman, although he knew she had a somewhat troubled past, much like myself. My parents had grown fond of my wife because they believed she brought out the best in me and considered her a positive influence on my life. She had a knack for showing them the side of her that she wanted them to see, and she was quite good at it. Most people who knew her wouldn't think she was that kind of person unless perhaps you were one of her close friends. My dad has been married to my mom for 36 years, so he has some wisdom about relationships. He did mention that things were different back in their day since women didn't have access to social media, which amplified their interactions with men and their means of seeking validation beyond their local area. Nowadays, women can attract attention from men all over the world through social media. I found out more about this when I checked my wife's social media accounts, but I'll talk about that later. My dad advised me to return home and be a stable presence in the household, especially for the sake of my kids. He suggested that I should listen to my wife in a non-judgmental way to reduce her defensiveness, and consider reconciliation if she's willing to put in the effort. He emphasized that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and if my wife was able to deceive me, who's to say the next woman wouldn't do the same? He acknowledged that it would be difficult to forget what had happened, and if forgiving her became too challenging, I should start considering alternative plans. After talking with my dad, I felt more motivated to return home and confront this difficult situation head-on. When I returned home to take my daughters to school, my wife wanted to have a private conversation with me. I told her we could talk later that night, and it seemed like she had been crying for a while. Honestly, I didn't feel much sympathy for her because she hadn't admitted to doing anything wrong. I received a text from Derek stating that he had deleted his copy of the footage and no longer had it. Since I couldn't verify this, I had to take his word for it. I also informed him that I would be sending him some legal papers as we had agreed upon. That evening, my wife was already at home when I returned. I was prepared for her to come clean and confess that she had cheated on me, essentially admitting that she had lied and presented herself differently at the beginning of our relationship. She was sitting on the balcony when I arrived, but even looking at her, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. The image I had of her before seemed to have shattered. I used to think that I was the only one with a troubled past, but at least everyone knows about mine, and am willing to take responsibility for it. When I got home, she was on the balcony. We usually spend time there, especially in the summer when the weather in Oregon is usually pleasant during that time. She greeted me when she saw me, but I didn't respond. I went inside, took a shower, and changed out of my work clothes. A few minutes later, I joined her on the balcony with a beer in my hand. We sat there in silence for a few minutes. My plan was to let her speak and see what other lies she might come up with. I could tell she was expecting me to start interrogating her, but instead, I let the awkwardness linger between us. She began by apologizing for her infidelity, explaining that it happened during a different phase of her life. She mentioned that when our relationship had just started, she wasn't sure it would last, and she was still in a partying stage where she did things she now regrets. She expressed remorse for her actions, and claimed that she had been faithful to me since then. I interrupted and asked her why she had been intimate with those men on the same night she met them, yet I had waited for months for her to be close with me, even though she kept saying she wasn't ready. Her response was that she wanted our first time together to be special and meaningful, unlike her encounter with the dancers, which she said didn't mean anything to her. This explanation made no sense to me. I pointed out that she had been on her knees with them on the first day, so why did I have to wait for a special occasion? It felt like she was using closeness as a reward for me while she freely engaged with strangers in an explicit manner in front of her friends. I also asked her if there were any other affairs she had that weren't recorded on tape. She insisted there were none, but I expressed my disbelief. She suggested that I check her phone and social media, stating that she was telling the truth. I mentioned that if she had enough time to edit her story, she had enough time to delete any incriminating evidence from her phone. Although I didn't really expect to find anything on her phone, I decided to take her up on the offer. She gave me access to her passwords for everything. After our conversation, while I felt she had admitted to her wrongdoing to some extent, I still believed she wasn't revealing everything. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I couldn't trust her fully anymore. Nevertheless, I decided to follow my dad's advice and give our relationship another chance. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the same bedroom with her, so I asked her to sleep in the guest room. The next day, I initially resisted the urge to check my wife's social media because I didn't expect to find anything. I figured she must have cleaned everything up if she had something to hide. However, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I found it difficult to concentrate at work. Eventually, I gave in and logged into her social media accounts, reading all her messages. I started constantly monitoring her social media, and I soon realized how unhealthy this behavior was. While she wasn't posting explicit content, it surprised me how many guys were messaging her. I noticed that she was deleting these messages to hide them from me because I had notifications set up, and when I tried to check a message, it would be gone by the time I got to it. I thought maybe attractive women typically receive this kind of attention, even those who aren't posting anything suggestive. Most of the men messaging her were from the Middle East and South Asian countries, so there wasn't much to worry about in that regard. A week later, our relationship was still strained, although we were at least talking. We hadn't been close since I discovered the affair, but my wife was making efforts to reconnect, and she was growing tired of my constant reluctance to move past this. We had a conversation where she suggested we see a marriage counselor because she couldn't bear my behavior any longer. I explained to her that this was not something I could easily let go of just by talking to someone. I wasn't sure if our marriage could survive this affair, and my obsessive monitoring of her social media and text messages was taking a toll on me. So, I decided to stop, even though it made me feel worse because it seemed like I couldn't trust her. I even began to feel like people were talking behind my back. Once I was at a local bar with some friends and saw some acquaintances hanging out with Derek. I felt like they were looking at me and then turning away when I noticed them. It felt like they were mocking me. I thought I might be paranoid, but because of the video, I couldn't help but feel like everyone was laughing at me behind my back. It was a really disheartening feeling, and it left me feeling depressed, ashamed, and sometimes even angry. I felt disrespected, and the old me would have confronted them and given them a piece of my mind. These were grown men acting like little kids, but I guess some people never really grow up. Instead of confronting them, I decided to leave the bar and head home early. It had been 2 weeks since D-Day, and during that time, I hadn't been intimate with my wife. I was trying to give marriage counseling a shot because I was having a hard time moving on and getting close to my wife. The affair was constantly on my mind. My wife scheduled some counseling sessions, and we arranged for a babysitter to watch the kids while we attended. Before our first session, I was concerned that the therapist might blame me for everything, as I had seen mentioned on this site. However, that wasn't the case. The therapist addressed my wife in a polite but direct manner. I won't go into all the details, but it felt like a thorough examination to get my wife to be completely honest and rebuild my trust. More truths came out, and my wife's reactions made me think there might be more incidents like that, although we might never know the full extent. I didn't feel like my wife was telling the whole truth, and the therapist seemed to share my doubts. The therapist encouraged us to work on reconciliation and provided us with techniques to rebuild trust. However, I wasn't convinced that reconciliation would work because my wife seemed to want to control what I knew. After our third counseling session, it seemed like my wife was losing interest because she felt like she was constantly under attack. I was learning things about her that I had no idea about, and a side of her personality emerged during the sessions that she wasn't comfortable with. She even tried to persuade me to switch to another therapist, but I declined. She started making excuses like showing up late and claiming she was too busy with work to prevent us from attending. Sometimes she would call ahead of time to cancel without letting me know. All of this led me to believe that she wasn't making a genuine effort to take responsibility for her actions. This was about 6 weeks after I found out about the affair. Update: I finally talked to that friend who told me about the video involving my wife. I asked if he knew how many people were aware of it. He said he was actually one of the last to find out among his friends. Many people we went to high school with and most of his friends already knew about it. He mentioned that he stumbled upon it by accident. I also asked him about the guys who were making fun of me the other day, and it turns out they knew about it too, so I wasn't imagining things. It felt like most of the guys I encountered in our town knew about the video, and I was the last to find out. That was really embarrassing for me. When I got home, I shared with my wife how much it bothered me that so many people had seen the video, and there was a chance it might still be out there. She suggested that we should move away from the area, and she was willing to change her job. It seemed like she had been thinking about moving even before I found out about the video. I just had a hunch. It appears she might have been ahead of me in knowing about the rumors regarding the video, and there's a possibility she knew about it before I did. I thought it might be a good idea to reach out to some of the friends who were in the video. Some of them are no longer friends with my wife, and some are still friends but might not be honest with me since they'd want to protect her. Others who weren't her friends have moved away. I tried messaging them on Facebook, but none of them have responded yet. Update: it's been 3 months since D-Day, and I ended up being intimate with my wife. She had been deliberately trying to seduce me around the house, and one night I gave in. It was more about desire and frustration than love, unlike before. For the first time since I found out about the video, she stayed in the master bedroom. The following night, she tried to initiate closeness again, but I wasn't interested. I usually don't refuse closeness with my wife, so she got frustrated. She was willing to do things in the bedroom I used to beg her for, but I just wasn't into it. She attempted to cuddle with me, but it felt suffocating. I endured it for one more night, then I couldn't take it anymore, so I started sleeping on the couch because I couldn't sleep otherwise. The next day, she said she hated seeing me suffer like this over nothing and suggested giving me a hall pass for a year. But I explained that this wouldn't change the fact that she wasn't the person I thought she was. Being intimate with other women meant nothing to me. I wanted something more meaningful with someone I loved, but I didn't feel like I could get that from her anymore. About 4 months in, I called my dad and told him I didn't think I could forgive my wife and that I was considering legally separating from her. My dad suggested I move to another place for a couple of months, thinking that some time apart might help. When I got home that day, I told my wife I'd be looking for another apartment close by so I could still see the kids as often as before. She pleaded with me, but my mind was already made up. Update: a week later, I signed a month-to-month lease for a furnished studio apartment near my house. All this time, I've been having doubts about the whole separation idea. I didn't want to move away from my kids or leave my wife. I really tried to stay, but I felt like a temporary break from my wife would be good for my mental health. My intention wasn't to move out permanently but to take some time for myself. Plus, I still have keys to my house where I keep my work tools and equipment. The night before I moved to my apartment, I had a serious argument with my wife. She got really upset with me, claiming she's given me space throughout this whole process. She thought I was acting completely irrational. She said I've gone mad for leaving them over something that happened when she wasn't even sure we were in a relationship. I told her we've discussed this before, and I believe there are still things she's not telling me. I need some time to collect myself. She asked how long we'd be separated, and I said I'd give it 2 months. Since most of my things are still at the house, we agreed to work toward reconciliation. After moving into my studio apartment, I felt more at ease. The first day was tough because my wife was really upset with me. She even told our 5-year-old daughter that I'd abandoned them. Who says that to a 5-year-old? When I came to take my 5-year-old to kindergarten and my 3-year-old to daycare, my daughter told me that Mom was crying. When she asked her what was going on, she said that Daddy had abandoned them. I told my daughter that I hadn't abandoned them because I'm still here taking them to school. After I dropped my daughters off at school, I called my wife and told her she should feel bad about herself for trying to manipulate our kids by telling them lies about me. I asked her not to involve them in this situation. She refused to admit any wrongdoing, insisting that she wouldn't lie for me because, in her view, I abandoned them. I reminded her that the only real change was that I no longer live with them, but I have still been fulfilling all my responsibilities as a father. The next day, I took my kids to school and daycare, and they seemed happy. After dropping them off, I went to work. After work, I headed straight to my client's job site to finish up some extra projects, then I went home to rest, and it was pretty much the same routine every day. I tried to avoid socializing too much because I didn't want to meet people who had seen that embarrassing video of my wife or face ridicule again, so I kept to myself. My wife and I talked about relocating when we reconcile, but for now, I was just too busy. I didn't see my wife for the rest of the week, but we talked on the phone regularly. Our conversations mainly revolved around coordinating our kids' activities, and sometimes she even dropped off food at my apartment. It was a stress-free week with no arguments, no kids crying or making demands. It felt like a partial vacation. I even thought that once this experience was over, I might move back into my house. I planned to take some time away from my wife and kids to clear my head. Some of my friends go on week-long hunting trips every season in places like Montana and Arkansas. There's one coming up next month, and I've been invited. I've put it off before because my wife always found a reason why I shouldn't go, and I usually agreed. The prices can be steep, but my buddy secured a group discount for us. The hunting trip was still a month away, but I've already purchased my ticket. We'll be traveling in my buddy's RV, and it promises to be a lot of fun. It's something to look forward to during these challenging times. The next couple of weeks followed a similar routine. However, in the middle of one week, my wife called me because the dishwasher had broken down, and she asked me to come and fix it. When I arrived at the house to repair the dishwasher, I was surprised. The living room looked completely different. The only times I visited the house were to pick up my kids in the driveway and grab my tools for side jobs. My tools are stored in the basement, and I usually use the basement entrance without entering the main living area. While fixing the dishwasher, I noticed that my wife had redecorated the living room. She had changed the curtains and bought a new couch. I asked her what was going on, and she explained that she wanted to make some changes. After fixing the dishwasher, I took the opportunity to get some things from the master bedroom and noticed that my wife had purchased many new outfits. When we talked about it, she mentioned that she had started going to the gym to get in better shape and work on self-improvement. I admit feeling a bit envious that she was making all these efforts to better herself, and I wondered if all these renovations were her way of moving on from me. I kept doubting whether leaving the house was the right decision, even though I knew it was for my peace of mind. After about 2 weeks, as the weather got colder, my wife informed me that there was an issue with the furnace. I came over to fix it, and noticed more changes to the house. I hadn't seen my wife up close since I repaired the dishwasher. When I saw her waiting in the driveway with my daughters, she was always in baggy pajamas, so I couldn't tell she had lost some weight. I mentioned it, and she explained it was her self-improvement month. We talked, and I got the feeling she wasn't as interested in me moving back. Why would she be? She still sees me as the handyman. I'm taking care of the kids and contributing financially. I'm still paying my share of the mortgage, and she gets the benefits of having a man around without having to cook or be intimate with me. It's like she's enjoying the best of both worlds. I informed my wife about the upcoming hunting trip to Montana, expecting her to object or raise concerns like it's dangerous or expensive. But she didn't object, ask questions, or show any resistance. She was surprisingly easy to talk to, and that made me uneasy. I thought maybe she had moved on and didn't care if I returned or not. That's the vibe I got from her. 2 weeks later, I went on the hunting trip with my friends, returned a week later, and picked up my daughters for school that Monday. As I pulled into the driveway and opened the car door for my daughters, they seemed thrilled to see me. However, my 6-year-old asked if they were getting a new daddy, which struck me as a strange question. I reassured her that I wasn't going anywhere and asked why she thought they were getting a new daddy. She said there was a guy who stayed at the house while I was away. I initially thought my daughter might have mistaken the man for my brother-in-law, who used to stay with us. However, my daughter knows my brother-in-law well enough not to confuse him with someone else. I even asked her if she meant Uncle Jamie, but she insisted that the man's name was Jacob, a name I'd never heard before. I couldn't access my wife's social media or texts because she changed her passwords when I moved out. The name Jacob consumed my thoughts for the rest of the day as I tried to recall if my wife had ever mentioned him before. Before my hunting trip, I noticed my wife was no longer enthusiastic about reconciling. She just wanted me to be there and fix things. I began to assume the worst-case scenario that what my daughter said was true, and there was a man named Jacob involved with my wife romantically. I thought that if I acted unsure about Jacob, it would allow my wife to deny any knowledge of him, similar to her denials on the footage where she tried to deny anything was happening and gaslight me. So, I decided to visit her that evening while my kids were asleep. I wanted to surprise her by showing up unannounced, but she didn't seem surprised, perhaps because she expected me due to my recent out-of-town trips. Our relationship remained cordial, although I sensed that the idea of reconciliation was losing momentum. We still operated under the impression that we should reconcile. I had the keys to the house, so I let myself in. When she saw me, she asked if I was hungry, but I declined, expressing my desire to talk. We sat in the living room, and I confronted her straight away about what I knew regarding Jacob and why she was having an affair when we had agreed to work on reconciliation. I observed her body language closely to gauge her reaction. She ran her fingers through her hair nervously, a sign that she knew she had been caught. Swiftly, she lifted her head and explained that Jacob was a co-worker. They had a close working relationship, and since I wasn't around, she had called him for help with household chores. I pressed her further, asking if this help extended to sharing our bedroom. She gave me a strange look, and in a raised voice, I demanded an answer. She admitted that they had slept together twice, claiming there was nothing more. I didn't buy her story about just 2 times. I knew there was much more to it. I asked her how long this relationship had been going on, and she initially tried to deflect by saying that if I hadn't left her and the kids, this wouldn't have happened. I sensed she was avoiding the question, so I raised my voice again, insisting she answer. That's when she confessed they'd been emotionally involved for over a year, and it had recently become physical. I reminded her that I had suspected something was amiss back when we were in marriage counseling, which was why she wanted to stop it. The therapist had seen through her lies and wanted her to come clean. In hindsight, I realized that I may have been deceived all along. I should have recognized that our relationship was built on a shaky foundation, as I didn't truly know who she was. I wonder how long their affair has been going on. I've read enough about infidelity to understand that a woman who had multiple encounters at a bachelorette party wouldn't be content with a simple, ordinary relationship like ours. I couldn't believe her claim that the physical affair only occurred during my absence, and because I was away, I sensed there was more to the story. I asked her how she thought we could proceed with reconciliation if she had been involved with this guy for who knows how many years. She didn't correct me, indicating that it was clear it was more than the 2 times she admitted. She confessed uncertainty about her feelings for him. When I calmly asked if she loved him, I saw a brief hesitation in her demeanor. I stood up from the couch and told her it was time to stop playing games. I pointed out that a woman who had closeness with 2 dancers and engaged in such behavior in front of friends wouldn't have done it just once. I expressed my relief that she was happy with this guy and stated that I now had valid reasons for legal separation. I acknowledged that we had a good run with our 2 beautiful daughters and suggested that it was time to call it quits. I used to wonder if I made the right decision by moving out, but now I'm certain I did the right thing by giving her the chance to make her mistakes. If I had accepted her lies and gaslighting all these years, I might have lived my life in ignorance. I owe some credit to the marriage therapist for opening my eyes, even though she didn't explicitly say my wife was lying. I was sharp enough to read between the lines of her questions and understand her perspective. It was like one dishonest person recognizing another, and I was just a learner in their midst. At that moment, I realized my wife was skilled at covering her tracks. I still had a feeling there was more to the story, and I suspected she was withholding something. When I got up from the couch to leave, she told me she still loved me, but I ignored her and walked away. I went home that day upset because I knew I wouldn't be able to see my kids as often as I'd like. I understood there was no turning back from this, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief because I had been proven right, and her true colors as a cheater had been revealed. It's eerie how accurate that quote about cheaters holds. I'm not a religious person, but I slept well that night, feeling like the universe was on my side throughout this experience. It seemed like everything fell into place systematically to unveil the lie I had been living. Just think, if Ethan hadn't told me about the video, all these events over the past few months wouldn't have occurred to open my eyes to the reality of who I'd been living with for the past 7 years. I called my dad the next day to share everything I had just discovered, and he reassured me that I handled things well. He told me not to blame myself because it wasn't my fault and that everything happens for a reason, bringing what was hidden into the open. Right now, my primary concern is the safety of my daughters. I need to know who the man my wife has introduced to them is. You've probably heard about individuals who date single moms with daughters for harmful reasons, and I wouldn't forgive myself if something like that happened to my kids. The next day, I picked up my children from school as usual. My wife called me to discuss our situation and mentioned she still wanted to reconcile with me, promising to cut off contact with the other man. I reminded her that she'd been in a relationship with him for years, so that wasn't the main issue anymore. For the first time, she challenged my belief that their relationship had been ongoing for years, claiming it only became physical recently when I abandoned her and the children. I saw this as an obvious attempt to deflect the blame, and I wasn't buying it. I pointed out that while we were supposed to be working on reconciliation, she had engaged in a physical relationship and even invited the man into our marital home. Instead of seeking revenge, I believed the right thing to do now was to get a divorce and focus on our daughters because she had already given up on our relationship a long time ago. She responded by blaming me for giving up when I left home, and I hung up the phone to avoid arguing with her. Despite her beauty, I knew she wouldn't struggle to find another man, possibly even better than me. I hoped she would find someone better for the sake of my daughter, as the worst-case scenario would be if she were having encounters with random men in my house, putting my daughters in danger. The next day, I reached out to one of her coworkers, who had worked with my wife for 2 years at the clinic as well as at her previous job. I called her unexpectedly and explained that I had recently suffered a work-related injury and needed a male physical therapist. I mentioned that my wife had recommended someone named Jacob and asked if she knew anything about him. I framed it this way because I knew she was knowledgeable about the workplace. She replied that she didn't know any Jacob, and the only Jacob she was aware of had been one of my wife's former clients at their previous job. I thanked her and ended the call. I realized that my question to her had been somewhat deceptive, and she might eventually ask my wife about it, so I decided to confront my wife about her obvious lie regarding Jacob being her coworker. I couldn't wait to discuss this with her in person. Moreover, there was no telling when her coworker might call her and inform her about the strange call she received from me, her husband. Therefore, I acted promptly by calling my wife to address the issue. I asked her why she had lied to me about the identity of her affair partner, pointing out that Jacob had been her client for more than 2 years and she had lied about it. I told her it was my right to know that she wasn't bringing home strangers and potential dangers to our daughters. She responded by saying that Jacob wasn't a dangerous person. He was a widower and a businessman who owned several hotels in the area. She claimed he was a clean and trustworthy person she had known for years, and he had been her client when his wife tragically passed away. She mentioned they had good chemistry but couldn't pursue anything due to her marriage. However, when I left them, she decided to give it a try. Interestingly, she kept trying to shift blame onto me while also admitting her own fault in the same sentence. After my call with my wife's coworker, I strongly suspected that my wife had been involved in a physical relationship with one of her wealthier former clients for well over 2 years or possibly more. I decided to do a background check on him, and thankfully he doesn't seem to have a history of criminal activity. I'd be dishonest if I didn't admit feeling a bit envious because this man was more successful than me. However, I also realized the importance of uncovering the truth about my wife continuing her secretive affairs after the Bachelorette incident. It was crucial for me to start fresh. Some of you might suggest a DNA test for my daughters, but I don't think it's necessary because they resemble me. To keep it short, 2 months later, we got a divorce, and I sold the house, splitting the proceeds. My wife moved in with her affair partner, who owns multiple properties, although his main residence is 50 miles away. I, too, relocated to another city for a new beginning. I found a better-paying job and rented a condo with enough space to store my work equipment. Despite the challenges of adapting to a new area and securing contracts, I welcomed the opportunity. Although I miss taking my kids to daycare every day, we share custody of my daughters, and I get to see them every other week. Life after divorce isn't as bad as I thought, and the custody arrangement provides me with time to pursue my hobbies. I haven't ventured into dating as I've been quite focused on work, and I don't foresee entering a long-term relationship anytime soon. That's the story of heartbreak and starting over. Was divorce the right choice, or could they have reconciled? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more compelling stories.